Good morning and happy Thursday. It's April 7th, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily live show. We run 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time until about 1 o'clock p.m. typically. Depends on how many guests we have and how many issues are coming, and we've always got lots of both. We're going to be expanding our digital show presence soon. I got some interesting things to announce in coming days. We're not fully set up for that yet, so I won't be the lone one providing shows to you here soon. And again, that's good because it takes some pressure off because there is always so much to cover, so much to talk about. So that reminder to everybody, this is a live show, which I love this format. We just got to roll with it. Leads to technical bugs now and then, but for the most part, it goes really well. And it makes it interactive. I like seeing those comments in the comment scroll. I like seeing you guys discussing things with each other, sending questions my way, sending questions towards the guests. It's great. And, just reminds me that you're all there and actually listening. I'm not talking into the wind. So I appreciate that. Again, no, let's just keep everything civil to a degree. We can differ with each other while still being respectful. If you really want to get into it and get rough and tumble, save it for Twitter. As you can see, Cory B. Morgan, that's my Twitter handle. And that's where I'm more receptive to having some of the more unsavory debate if we want to. Good to see you all there. Ashley, Claudette, Kim, and Scott and Melissa. Lots of folks coming in. I like seeing Melissa coming in from Halifax. It's great seeing the East Coast folks popping in here. Somebody made a comment recently saying we should be the Canadian Standard rather than the Western Standard because we cover the national issues on things. Appreciate that. We're going to keep covering it, but we've got a long tradition as the Western Standard. Just don't let the name fool you. We will talk about things across the country, and I got a couple of great guests to talk about those. It's going to be a lot of federal issues today. I've got Shuvaloy Majumdar from the MacDonald Laurier Institute. He wrote a column in the National Post a little while ago. He's a specialist in foreign policy, things such as that. He was a close advisor to Stephen Harper when Harper was the prime minister, and he's a very bright man to discuss some of the things. Well, where is Canada's role in the world? What can we do? What should we do? It'll be a good nuanced discussion, not just our usual armchair folks who sit on the sidelines. This is somebody who's had to deal with foreign policy workers and advise them. Then yet another Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidate, Grant Abraham. He's thrown his hat into the ring there, and I think there's 10 or possibly 11 now. The race is getting very busy, but we're continuing with our coverage and bringing in every candidate we can to speak to you. I think Grant's going to be the sixth one of the bunch to come on the show, and we'll see what he's got to offer in the Conservative race. So before we get to that, let's see what's got me going today. And it's again comes to media, free speech, and all those issues. We've had the Trudeau Liberals flirting with legislation to control independent media for years now. They've always wanted to. I remember way back in the 90s, actually, towards the end of the 90s, CRTC put out a release. I remember laughing at it. Maybe it was around 2000, but they were just saying, we've examined the issue and we've decided for now that we're not going to regulate the internet. Actually, what they were saying is they couldn't figure out how they could. There's a lot of people in government just want to control information on how we do it. And the Liberals are no exception. In fact, they are exceptional when it comes to it. Now, despite spending hundreds of millions in tax dollars to subsidize their preferred media outlets, independent media outlets continue to flourish, like this one. Canadians are abandoning legacy media outlets in favor of new independent news providers en masse. And it's got the establishment quite frightened. Since the approach with the subsidy carrot has failed, the government's now moving on to using the stick. They started with Bill C-10 last year, and that was modeled to control digital platforms. As radio and television ratings have been continually tanking, streaming platforms, of course, have been experiencing record growth. Citizens preferred the raw content unfettered by government regulation, and they voted with their feet. A new world of broadcasting is opened up for people. A person or a group of people can set up a decent broadcast with engaging content for a mere fraction of what it cost only a decade ago. New streaming productions were purely guided by supply and demand. Sub-rate productions languished with a handful of viewers and faded away, while new upstarts sprung up seemingly from nowhere and sometimes took the internet by storm. But rather than examine why our traditional broadcasting dinosaurs can no longer draw viewers, the government's seeking ways to drag the new media outlets down to the same crappy level of engagement as the rest of the legacy media. C10 would have come with rules for Canadian content minimums and, of course, French content. It would drive outside sources of information from your screens and force you to consume the mediocre crap that the establishment wants you to view. It would, of course, put those small upstart broadcasters at a large disadvantage and drive digital streaming services towards large outlets. Now, C10 died on the order paper due to the 2021 federal election, but the government quickly regurgitated the bill as C11 now in the next session, and it's coming down the pipes now. They dearly want to grab and maintain control here. Now, on top of C11, the Liberals have now introduced Bill C18. That bill's modeled to shake down the larger internet providers and force them into paying media outlets for content that appears on their platforms. Now, media outlets and those internet platforms, the heavyweights, have a symbiotic relationship. You know, those big ones like Google, YouTube, Facebook, they can reach millions of people, but they also rely on those independent content creators to draw the viewers and readers. This relationship's far from perfect. I mean, Facebook in particularly can be frustrating. It's one of the main drivers for traffic for the Western Standard, for example. But when there's an issue or a conflict, there's nearly no such thing as responsive customer service. But outlets like ours are dependent on those social media giants right now, and we can't forget that those giants are dependent upon us too. Digital media is a new thing. We're witnessing the primordial soup of a whole new world of communication and broadcasting. And if it's left alone, it will evolve naturally. We'll all be enjoying an advanced new world of media. If we let the government, though, start to get involved and start stirring around in there, we're going to be left with a mess. The government's claiming they want to ensure fair competition in the media market. That's completely untrue. They want to ensure the establishment media remains dominant, especially since the government invested such a massive amount of tax dollars into keeping those big old outlets working. And of course, beholden to the government. The only thing the authoritarian state, any authoritarian state, despises more than an armed populace is one that has free and open press and discourse. The Soviet Union knew this as they created Pravda while banning independent news. And North Korea, of course, goes to incredible pains to shut down any access to new information and news for its citizens. Media and the internet must be left alone to develop based on the user demand and the free market. The state always has its own interest in mind rather than that of the citizens. Any efforts to control information is going to end poorly for Canadians. Yes, we're going to be exposed to some fake news and things. Well, the CBC has proven themselves capable of that anyways, whereas they repeatedly have to keep retracting their own stories when they're spreading garbage. So let's not pretend that shutting down small outlets is going to improve the quality of things out there. Yeah, we may get more access to foreign content, more than the cultural preservationists would like to see. So what? Have you seen what's on regular TV these days? How many people tune into Canadian productions? I mean, there's some good ones out there, but the majority of the content provided on TV and in theaters has been American for decades. Has society fallen apart due to this? Have we forgotten how to be Canadian? The government's motives in trying to control the internet, media, and its platforms, it's insidious. We need to pay attention here, guys, and push back against this ugly power grab. Unfortunately, the Conservative opposition is mired in their own leadership race, and they aren't a terribly effective opposition in Parliament right now. The NDP and the Liberals are in bed together. Both are eager to shunt and control information. We have to do it ourselves, folks. Abandon those mainstream media outlets. They're hopelessly rotten within, and we need to speed up their demise. The remaining principled journalists within those institutions, and there are some, they'll rise in the new media world and they'll be fine. The parasites within the mainstream, though, they'll fall by the wayside. So get out there, subscribe to multiple platforms like Rumble and Getter, and don't become dependent on only a couple of sources to get information. There's a war going on right now for the access to your eyes and ears, and unless you stand up and fight back, you're going to be the one who loses it. That's what's got me going today, guys. Okay, let's check in on somebody who's providing news on one of those alternative outlets, that being ours, and that's our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going way there across the other end of the Western Standard Enterprises here?
Yeah, I think I can see you there in the background, Cory. But yeah, I'm still riding a high because I got the word "tiswas" into the pipeline show last night.
Yes, we don't hear that one often.
No, exactly. So that's why you got to expand your vocabulary. So that's what it's all about here. So this morning, our main story right at the moment is the UCP has a new caucus member. Goes by the name of Brian Jean. Won the by-election up in Fort McMurray last month with a stated goal of trying to remove Jason Kenney from office. And immediately right after he was sworn in, he said that exact thing. So he does not expect Jason Kenney to be the premier after May 18th when the UCP leadership votes are announced. Ironically, he said Danielle Smith, who's also announced she's going to be running, should sort of maybe stay out of it until the until the announcement is official. So coming from a guy who's spent the last 2 years sniping at Kenny, that's a bit rich. We got a story from the Canadian Armed Forces Ombudsman, who says public knowledge of all the military cases, sexual misconduct cases, is driving morale into the toilet. His office has hundreds and hundreds of cases going back several years that they haven't even got to yet. But he says his biggest concern is the public knowing about them. Our Mike Thomas has done a column on Elon Musk, the world's richest man, and his takeover of Twitter. And Mike's got some predictions on what Elon Musk will be doing in the coming days. A disturbing story north of Calgary, Cory, where RCMP have discovered 2 cows dead near a cemetery. They were slaughtered and skinned, and their meat removed from their carcasses. So, as we know, the price of meat has skyrocketed in the last few months. So, I'm sure they're going to be selling that on the black market. Also, one that comes as no surprise to Western Standard viewers and readers: a second arrest has been made in the arson at the Ottawa apartment building. You remember that there was a small fire set and the doors were locked and everybody fell over themselves, media and politicians, to blame the truckers for it. Ottawa police have arrested a second suspect now, and of course, nothing to do with the truckers whatsoever. We've got a column from Red Deer MLA, Jason Stefan, talking about the Liberal NDP axis and how Alberta is threatened by them. Jody Gondek and her Edmonton counterpart, Mayor Sohi, held a climate summit last night, talking about how their cities are going to battle climate change. And she says Calgary's already starting to see the benefits of her first thing she did in office was to declare a climate emergency. So that's on the site now too. Our Matthew Horwood in Ottawa is going to be a busy boy today with the federal budget coming down this morning. He's already got a story up talking with Conservative leader Erin Candace Bergen about what she expects to see in the budget and what she fears she's going to see. And interesting story from Matthew and Blacklock's reporter: Canadians who had their bank accounts frozen because they donated $20 to the aforementioned truckers convoy could see some financial compensation. So that'll be interesting as the days go ahead. So that's what's up there now, Cory.
Right on. Well, I mean, my account wasn't seized because I didn't have any in it in the first place, so that was easy enough. But that's an interesting development. I mean, if they start giving money back, I mean, that kind of opens the floodgates, I think, to a lot of liability on those actions from the Emergencies Act back then, too. So I think that could really snowball into something quite interesting in the future here.
It does. And hey, look at this, Cory. Look what I got.
Oh, the new swag is in.
Isn't that cool? Western Standard hats. So if you ask nicely, maybe I'll grab you one out of the box.
Well, we'll see what we could do. I mean, you had that nice new haircut this week, though, and you're covering it up with that big old hat there now.
That's true. This will be my weekend non-showering attire.
Right on. Well, always good to keep promoting the outlet how we can, whether it's covering our thinning hair or with gifts to others.
You bet. Anything to cover up the growing forehead.
Right on. All right. Thanks, Dave. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Cory.
So yes, that was our news editor, Dave Naylor. And this is the time, of course, when, as you can see, all of those stories from all across the country, all sorts of unique and original content and stuff. We're constantly putting it up there. It's constantly breaking. And we do so because you guys subscribe to us. So thank you all who have already subscribed to the Western Standard. This is how we can keep rolling. This is how we aren't like those outlets that take the money from the government. We don't have to answer to them because we're not taking their money. We're not dependent on them. We are dependent on you, though. And that's why we have to answer to you. Hey, if we put out a bunch of stuff you don't like reading, we're going to go away. We put out stuff you enjoy, we'll continue to grow. And we've been growing excellently lately, so we must be on the right track. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do get on there. $99 for a year, or $10 a month. And hey, if you use that coupon code you can see on the screen there, Triggered, you just put in Triggered as a coupon code when you subscribe, you'll get another $10 off. It's well worth your investment into us to allow us to keep providing this sort of news and shows for you. So get on there. It's less than old newspaper subscriptions used to cost 20 years ago, and you don't have to deal with getting rid of all those used up newspapers afterwards. So take out a subscription. It's really, really appreciated. And I saw a discussion, I won't call out the individual, but some private messaging that went to the Standard of a man that was quite upset that we were behind a paywall and called us just, said it was all just about the money and we should be giving out our content for free. Well, we are, editorially a conservative-minded publication. We're capitalists, guys. We don't expect anything for free from anybody else. That's why we don't take any subsidies, but we aren't giving things away for free either. We have a large and growing news team, and we have to pay them somehow, guys. If you want to keep going and getting your, quote-unquote free content, sir, go to the CBC. And it's not free. They're taxing the crap out of us to fund that garbage, but that's what you get. If you want good coverage, responsible coverage, an outlet, again, that responds to the viewers, readers, and listeners, subscribe to us. We'll keep covering it. You don't have to agree with everything we say, but as you can see, there's a whole lot of breaking news stories out there. Jackie asking how to get one of those hats. Yeah, we just got those in. We've got jackets. We've got pins, actually. You can't quite see it. It's next to my microphone, a little WS pin. Derek loves getting those promotional merchandise things going, and I believe we have plans to start sharing and distributing those sorts of things down the road pretty quickly. We're going to be doing a great big upgrade pretty soon, actually, for the entire website and system, and that's going to include opportunities to get those things out there. So you could, again, find another way to perhaps support us and get a piece of value, and of course help promote us while you're out there on the streets. So the other way we do pay our bills, of course, is sponsors, and I should speak to one. You regular listeners are used to hearing me talk about them, but it's nice to have a sponsor. Both the sponsors for this show, the main ones, are ones that I believe in and agree with. I don't have to make up some puffy statement to try and pump them up, and that's Bitcoin Well. These guys are your gateway into getting invested into digital currencies, particularly, of course, Bitcoin. As you can see that on that map, that's all of their ATM locations all across Canada. They're a publicly traded company, and they make digital currency accessible and practical. That's the thing. People wonder, how does this work? How can I do things with it? Is it useful to me? These are the guys that help lay it out safely. I mean, they're a locally, like I said, company. You can deal one-on-one with real people to see if it's for you and consultations. And it's safe. It's non-custodial. They say that over and over in their site. And what that means is they never have your money in their hands. It's always yours. It's in your wallet. It's safe. You got to watch for some of those other companies out there where they're saying, give us the money and then we'll fix it up for you. That's not the case with Bitcoin Well. They help educate you with Bitcoin Academy, things like that. So you know what you're getting into, you know what your investment is, and you can set up a hedge. Some people, I saw somebody in the comment scroll saying the other day that there's no assurances that the government can't get it. Yes, there is. They can't. They can't, guys. It's physically out of their hands. You have a ledger. It's a cold wallet, it's called. It's stored on that. It's outside of their reach. They cannot touch it. And they want it. And who knows what's going to happen down the road. But no, you're getting it. If you want your currency out of reach of the government, this is a way to do it. So what's that, Claudette saying? The Edmonton Sun's $2.75 a day. I haven't bought a paper in so long. 3 pages of local news and the rest of articles from Hollywood. Yeah, the establishment media outlets are having a very hard time. I mean, part of what's cool and interesting with the way new things are developing, though, is we don't need the massive amount of infrastructure that the old outlets had to have in the past. We don't need a giant building with printing presses in it. We don't need, as a studio, I mean, yes, and Derek assures us it was a big investment, and it has been, and it's still costly, but to be able to put on a production like this compared to 20 years ago, if you wanted to have a TV show, a fraction of the cost, and we can reach out to so many people, and they have so many options out there to get into. Who goes out and buys a newspaper anymore? Why would you want to? I mean, you got to get rid of the thing. It's it says Claudette saying 384 papers have folded in the last 2 years, and it is unfortunate. I don't celebrate the loss of jobs, but what I do look forward to is an evolution to something better. I've used the analogy before. I mean, when I started in the oil field, a long time ago. I mean, we're getting up on 30 years ago now. I started as a rodman, which is like a helper or an assistant to a surveyor. And I had to put in a couple of years. Some surveyors were really nasty, grouchy devils. You know, they're a pain to work for. You're in some rough conditions. It took me a couple of years as a rodman to learn and build up my skills to the point where I learned the formulas that were involved with conventional optical survey and things like that. Or they would even let me out as a junior surveyor to start surveying myself out there and doing all that. It was a lot of training, long ways up. And then shortly after I made it up to being a conventional surveyor, GPS came along and basically wiped my trade out. Very little need for conventional survey anymore. I mean, it took a few years for it to happen, but that trade was fading fast. There were two ways to go about it, and we saw both happen. Some of the old time surveyors just said, we're not going to flex, we're not going to change. And well, what happened was they ended up essentially eased out to pasture. They were out of work. Flexible ones like myself, and it helps being younger back then anyways, you know, but say, well, I'm going to have to learn how to do other things. I had to learn how to create maps in a digital format, and I had to use GPS to build those maps, things like that. Embrace the new technologies because they're better, or get left behind. And that's what's happening in the media world a lot now too, is some of the old timers, and I understand they're frustrated. They put in decades. They had to go to journalism school. They did a whole bunch of stuff. And then they end up losing viewership to a degree to upstarts and new outlets and social media personalities. But the pouting about it isn't going to help. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to save anything. They've got to flex and get into the new product. So what we're seeing now is a government protecting dinosaurs. They're protecting, you know, for the analogy, the old conventional survey, essentially, to compare it to that. And it's futile. I mean, you can spend a whole lot of money, but in the end, it's going to go away. And we've got a lot of good columnists, good reporters, and good people in mainstream media, but they're riding a dying machine, and it's time for them to move on into a new format. Okay, Shuv seems to be running a little behind today, but hopefully he comes in. I've had these challenges of live shows, of course, as we get these technical hiccups now and then. So let's go into some more of the news there. What was that one that Dave was talking about, though? Skinned cows being found on the side of a road. What on earth is going on with that? This is the sort of thing gets people paranoid. And I mean, it was behind a cemetery, no less. You know, I imagine there's going to be some speculation as to whether or not we've got cultists or things like that going on. I see, as Eva put in that story, the prices of beef and everything. I mean, cattle are an expensive commodity these days. It says skinned. It says slaughtered farther up in the story. So I wonder if that was just what was left of the carcass after somebody actually fully harvested it, as if they were hunting. You know, we used to string up cattle rustlers. It's I don't know if we necessarily want to go back to that, but it's a very serious crime, and it puts some business operators in a terrible situation. It's crazy to see stuff like that going on. But yeah, you look at the price of beef in a supermarket, and you can see why somebody's tempted to just go out in a rural area and take down a cow. Ridiculous and bizarre stuff going on out there. But I mean, it's indications of a very messed up society we have these days. All right, I see Shuv sitting in the lobby there. We're going to pull him into the show and have a talk here on some more international stuff. I mean, Canadian, but how we're dealing with the rest of the world. So let's bring him in here and have a discussion. Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you, Cory. How are you?
Very good. Yeah, it's been a while, man. You know, I missed you when you came out west last time. We'll have to corner you next time.
We're going to fix that problem with great haste.
Great. So I appreciate you coming in. You know, we've got a really haywire world, as I said, in a lot of ways going on. And we all have opinions, and we're watching things develop, but we get mixed news and things. But I mean, the international scene is more volatile, I think, than we've seen in a generation. And you've got a great deal of experience in foreign affairs. I mean, it's easy to say the country should do this or do that, but there's always a lot more complication involved in those sorts of actions. And I just wanted to bring you in to talk more broadly about those issues, particularly the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And you've written a good piece that was in the National Post a few weeks ago on that. And perhaps if you could kind of run down what you'd written in that piece and where Canada's role might or could or should be in this mess right now.
I tried to take a step back, and thank you for noticing. I think it's you and my mother. That makes two people who've had a chance to read it. So thank you for that. I tried to take a step back beyond the immediate pressures of the day to supply the Ukrainians the equipment they require to defend their sovereign territory, and paint a bigger picture in terms of what is this age of competition we're in? What exactly is happening in this proxy war in Ukraine? And in doing so, I first tried to establish that what we all need to come to terms with is that while Russia is featuring in our headlines and our news in this devastating conflict in Ukraine that Vladimir Putin has started, is the backdrop of the fact that China has replaced Russia as our principal rival. That the cooperation between China and Russia in Ukraine and in theaters around the world, from the Euro-Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific, is visceral and real. That our own Western weaknesses, where we become preoccupied with performative issues ranging from human dignity to energy security, have come at the cost of us being prepared to unlock the military and economic potential of the world's democracies to confront this rising age of authoritarians. And that finally, what my sense is of this conflict is that there's really no way that this can end without the end of Vladimir Putin's tyranny. And so I tried to, in a few hundred words, cover those big topics around what we're dealing with and what Canada, our democratic allies, our established alliances in NATO, and our new and emerging alliances like the ones we're seeing in the quadrilateral security dialogue with India, Japan, the United States, Australia, need to do to come to a common sense of an understanding of the threats we face and a common plan for how we defeat them.
Well, it's it. I mean, it's such a difficult, complicated, and delicate area. I mean, we're seeing some of the horrifying images coming out of there of some of the, execution of citizens and bodies are being found. Nobody wants to see an escalation. That's the biggest fear. But I mean, there's also the fear, well, do you just let him come in and take the place, and that's the least amount of casualties? But I don't find it believable that Vladimir Putin would stop with just Ukraine.
No, I mean, we've seen that what's happening both out of Beijing and the Kremlin are the designs of empires, right? Like in China, we've seen Xi Jinping convert the state into a communist party one-man rule for lifetime rule. We've seen Vladimir Putin do the same thing in the Kremlin. Both of these men are in the business of empire building. What China is trying to do is restore the Middle Kingdom, in which, in Chinese lore, where China was at the heart of internationalization and had their own system of rules for how the world could serve China's rise. For Vladimir Putin, he has an obsession with restoring the so-called Russian Imperium, in the idea that any Russian-speaking population in the world belongs under the Russian state, and that Ukraine as a country does not have the right to exist, despite the agreements of his own country, and despite the fact that Ukraine has been a thriving civilization of its own that goes back 1,000 years. So these are empire builders who are trying to refashion the world in their own image and redraw borders to that effect. And in doing so, they're in the process of ending the post-war order that was fashioned after the Second World War, and challenging, the West and new democracies to resist them. And so that's the wider context, Cory, I think we're finding ourselves in.
Yeah, so bringing it back towards Canada and around here, though, I mean, we're not a large military power, and we're unfortunately not as much of an economic power as we used to be either. What role, can we have, or do we have, or should we have?
We are still a member of the G7. We are still a founder of NATO. We are still a member of the Five Eyes. These are old arrangements, clubs that we belong to in shaping the post-war order of the last 75 years. What I think we need to do is dispense with the idea of wishing the world as it were, and to see it for what it really is. And what that means is clearly articulating what our national interests are militarily and economically, in the security of our people, the prosperity of our people, and in the normalization of the values we all hold dear. What that principally means today is to sit back and say, listen, there are some tangible problems that Canada can solve. European reliance on Russian energy is unsustainable, unattractive. They're basically funding the war machine that is butchering these innocent Ukrainians. And if Baltic countries can reduce their reliance, eliminate their reliance, Lithuania, Latvia, on Russian energy, then why cannot continental Europe do the same thing? Well, one of the great answers to that is Canadian energy and long-term clean Canadian energy stability for the world. We have not only just exemplary environmental standards, we have strong ethical practices. We don't manipulate prices for the sake of leverage over other countries. When we agree to in a deal, we stand by our deals. So providing that long-term energy security to European and Indo-Pacific growth needs is a wonderful alternative that Canada could get serious about supplying. The second is we've seen in early February, on the 4th of February, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping stood side by side in the Olympics and declared boundless cooperation. In that document, they explicitly stated their ambition in polar and Arctic interests. Russia has been refurbishing old war bases and naval bases across their north. China has a stated objective to try and establish shipping and data supply routes and critical mineral interests in the Canadian North and in the polar and Arctic region. One of the most important things that Canada can do today is harden our Arctic flank with our NATO partners by investing not just in the military and defensive requirements that we need to protect our own sovereign domain, but also in the development, the infrastructure, the prosperity of the Indigenous peoples of the North. It is a vast swath of territory that is Canadian, and we have a national responsibility to grow it, to be good stewards of it, and to ensure that people in it thrive and thrive so safely. The third thing that Canada can do is consider how, our democracy can work with other democracies. In 75 years, we've seen the emergence of different economies. We've seen the decline of others relative to those. We know that the center of gravity for global growth is going to be on the Pacific. So much of what happens in Ottawa and Toronto focuses on the transatlantic relationship, which is not a bad focus, but we also have the opportunity as a Pacific power to establish our interests and to work with other democracies, whether it's Japan, Australia, India, South Korea, as partners in establishing the basis of rules for how prosperity of that region would grow, but more importantly, how Canadian economic life can participate, inform it, and benefit from it. So, those are three simple, big ideas that we can do today. And it requires a government that isn't focused on just being performative on issues in the international stage, but actually back it up with the kind of hard work necessary to achieve them.
Well, that's it. Most often when we see our leaders going over to summits and things such as that, they seem to be more focused on virtue signaling rather than proposing or pitching any solid plans on things moving forward. I would hope that, if we wanted to be taken seriously, we start coming up with some more serious policy proposals among them when we're at these meetings.
Yeah. Well, Cory, I'm not going to diminish the idea that, there's a domestic audience. Canadian leaders serve the Canadian public. It's good that they send things back to Canada that, affirm the values of Canada. But what I will say is, without backing it up with real concrete steps on getting our energy to markets, on speaking clearly and lucidly about European and Arctic security, on engaging an Indo-Pacific region with the kind of hard work that's necessary. If you don't back it up with real and meaningful action, then you're not going to be considered by others around the world as a genuine partner. And that's one of the reasons why Canada is being left out of critical relationships that are forming, whether it's the quadrilateral strategic dialogue that has now commercial dimensions, the deal between Australia, UK, and the United States, not just on submarines, but also on cybersecurity and on missile defense, which is important to our Canadian North, on a range of trading relationships. We're just not doing the work. I think that's the most frustrating thing to consider when we're looking at what our government is doing, is that the amount of work that's necessary to back up the virtue signaling is just not being done, and it's coming at the expense of Canadian interests, and it can't be tolerated much longer.
So getting to the other part of your column, you had mentioned China, and they've been getting increasingly aggressive as well with regards to Taiwan and other neighboring areas. And they've never been really a a very nice international player, at least these last few decades. And they're kind of sliding under the radar with what they're doing these last 6 months or so, as everybody's focused on Eastern Europe. How should we manage our relationship with them? I mean, we've got so much integrated trade going on with them too. We're very dependent on Chinese trade. So, it's a concern.
Listen, China is the second largest economy in the world. I would say, though, that of our trading relationship with China, while we do have a more meaningful trading relationships on agriculture and some commodities, it isn't as deeply engaged as Australia's trade was with China. And Australia, being in the neighborhood, had realized the threat and the risk of engaging with Chinese commercial interests, and has proceeded with not just decoupling from China's weaponized commercial leverages over Australia, but redoubling on relationships. Like in India, the Australians and the Indians announced an important and an amazing trade deal. And they've been pursuing, the long-term kind of trading infrastructure that will supply the Australian economic interest for the long term as they decouple from the risk of what China poses. For Canada, when we think of China, while you say that they've kind of slipped under the radar, it's a fact. But, the Chinese government issued a massive cyber assault across Ukrainian infrastructure just prior to Russia's invasion. The Chinese state propaganda has been echoing the outrageous lies coming from the Kremlin, trying to justify what they're doing in Ukraine. The Chinese are working hand in glove with the Russians in international institutions, whether it's the United Nations or other multilateral forum. The Chinese have softened the impact of Western sanctions on Russia by buying Russian wheat, securing long-term Russian oil, providing Huawei to back up Russia's state surveillance system. And the Chinese are working with Russia to manipulate negotiations with Iran, which is a whole different issue, against America, against the West, against our interests. On one level, they are strong cooperative partners with Russia in their invasion of Ukraine. On the other, I think they're watching how effectively the Russians, or ineffectively the Russians, have been in Ukraine, because they have the same ambitions to redraw the borders of the Indo-Pacific by the eventual conquest of Taiwan. And so I think what they're, on one side, they're active participants. On the other side, they're taking a long-range view. My thesis, though, is that however this turns out for Russia and Ukraine, Russia is vastly diminished. If Russia succeeds in Ukraine and Vladimir Putin is able to retain some sort of veto over Ukrainian Euro-Atlantic decisions, or some sort of territory, whether it's the Ukrainian East or Crimea, if Vladimir Putin gains any victory out of this, China wins, because they know that intervention can actually result in expansion of borders. And if Russia fails, if Vladimir Putin ultimately ends up behind bars or worse, if Russian forces are routed and we begin prosecuting these war crimes for what they are, then Beijing gets to see a country that is 1/8 the size of their economy in Russia, completely broken, divested from the international system, and an opportunity for Beijing to move in to carve out their economic interests in Russia, which include energy, agriculture, metals, and other specific things that a diminished Russian state would provide for the rise of China. So, China is a very important question in this. They are the biggest trading partner for Russia, and across Eurasia and into Europe, including in Ukraine, China has some very strong economic interests that they're going to be focused on yesterday, today, and well into the future.
Yeah, well, we're seeing just, military moves and things happening that we haven't seen in generations. As you said, I mean, whatever way the outcome comes in this, it's going to have long-lasting repercussions. I mean, the term you used as well, though, that is troubling, but it's real, is it's turning into a proxy war. And, those of us who grew up in the Cold War, proxy wars can turn very horrible and extended and prolonged just because, some nations aren't putting their own boots on the ground. They can put a lot of resources in that leads to a lot of misery in the wherever the theater of the battle is. And I guess we could just hope that this gets resolved in somehow shorter time rather than longer, because this could be awful.
Listen, I lament about this, because I think that if, people had listened to Prime Minister Stephen Harper back in as early as 2008, and others, including George W. Bush at the tail end of the Bush administration, on admitting Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, I have to believe that Russia would never have invaded. They would never want to trigger Article 5. They know they would never win in that context. So one is a lament of 2008 not having had a chance to prevent this scenario, which Russia had stated it was going to pursue. Then in 2014, when all this truly began in earnest with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think the West did a lot to kind of begin waking up and taking the cobweb out of off of the institutions that it had to confront these threats, like NATO and others. But still didn't go far enough to really deter Vladimir Putin from making the decision to invade Ukraine. Instead, the West pursued energy deals with Russian energy supply, oil and gas supply. They wished that Vladimir Putin and China would want to preserve long-term economic interests over pursuing, insane imperial dreams in the short term. And then even today, we're now 7 weeks into this invasion of Ukraine. I struggle with the fact that we're incrementally increasing our sanctions regime on Russia. They're vast and they're significant and consequential, but we still hear that more sanctions can be imposed, and that we're incrementally supplying the Ukrainians the critical weapons that they require to defend themselves. I'm not calling for NATO troop deployments, our young men and women from Canada to deploy into Ukraine. I'm not calling for that. What I'm saying is that we're seeing that the Ukrainian army is competent, they are effective, they require material support, which we can provide even as Canada today. And we continue to pursue this idea of incrementally increasing our support to Ukraine because we don't want to escalate a scenario that Vladimir Putin has already escalated. So I think the kind of strength and resolve that we should be showing should be much more. It should include massive economic blockades against what supplies a Russian war machine. It should include secondary sanctions on all these Chinese entities I've described that are supporting and propping up Moscow and Russia in their campaign in Ukraine. And it should include a plan for how democratic nations around the world, from the Quad to NATO and their alliances, are capable of confronting this threat. That's what a real plan, I think, looks like, that would force these authoritarians back into their borders and to realize that, through peace, through strength, the Western order will prevail, and it's one that they cannot contest.
Well, we'll see as it develops. We've got a whole lot of crazy diplomatic play going on, unfortunately, and a lot of confusion and different views on it. I mean, I think what most rational people do want to see is some resolution and at least an end to the battles, because it's just getting terrible over there. But I really appreciate you coming in today to talk on that and explain a little more of it and expand on your column from the other week. Where can we find more information about what you're up to, Shuv, and where your publications go?
That's really kind of you to say that. I'm despite the horrendous nature of the situation, it's always good to see you, Cory. I'd love your viewers to visit www.MacDonaldLaurier.ca. It's a big independent think tank in Ottawa, which I lead the foreign policy practice. I have an incredible roster of colleagues who see the world for what it is and are effective at communicating what the Canadian interest is in it. There's no shortage of ideas on what Canada can and should be doing, and we're in the business of promoting those ideas energetically to our political leaders so that, for the sake of Canadians, we can get it right. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thanks, Shuv. And again, as you said too, yeah, it was good to see you, and we'll have to corner you the next time you're out here, or if somehow I get dragged out east. So thanks for coming in, and we'll talk again.
We'll see each other soon. Thanks, Cory.
Thanks. Yes, that's Shuvaloy Majumdar of the MacDonald Laurier Institute. I keep getting it mixed up with the Montreal Economic Institute. We've got so many institutes going on out there of conservative leaning, with some great papers and articles being written. And the stuff that Shuv puts out there, though, is really well worth reading. It's a nuanced, good discussion, which we need more of in this whole thing. I know there's a whole lot of conspiracies swirling around, and a whole lot of perceptions and views people have. And I know not all of our viewers agree with those things. That's fine, though. We've got there's different points of view, and we're going to cover those. Again, if you're waiting for me to say Putin's a good guy, don't hold your breath. Not a chance. He's a monster. So, getting further, let's talk about one of our sponsors before we move further on things, and that's the speaking of citizens being able to remain with their rights, be independent, and so on. And that's the Canada Shooting Sports Association. These guys have been a fantastic sponsor for us for quite some time, and their name speaks for itself. They're an association for people who enjoy firearms for whatever reason you may want to. That's the thing. We should never have to even explain ourselves as to why we want to have, possess, trade, or use a firearm. It's a right. It's property. It's our business to have that. But the federal government feels otherwise. They think they should be able to take those away from you. They want to keep recategorizing firearms, taking them out of your hands. You should be disturbed when a government wants to, I talked earlier, they want to control our speech. They want to control our information and what we can do. Well, they also want to take away your property, particularly firearms. The Canada Shooting Sports Association has a number of legal challenges out on your behalf against those actions by the government. So, hey, check those guys out, because the only way they can do it, it's kind of like I was talking earlier with the Western Standard, real grassroots things. We have to stand up for ourselves. We have to support ourselves. You guys are supporting independent media. I really appreciate it. Same sort of thing with being as a firearm owner. You've got to support yourself. This group is there to support you. Get on there, check them out. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Take out a membership, because that's how they can help. They can keep those court challenges. They have all sorts of other resources, by the way, more than just the political stuff. They're an association. So they have videos on safe firearm use and links to where there's, trade shows going on or events that are of interest to people into shooting sports. So get on there, take a membership out. They've been sponsoring us. We appreciate it. And of course, I appreciate their work they're doing on behalf of myself as a legal firearm owner. And their website is cssa-cila.org. So, yeah, we've got a lot going on. I'll have my next guest on in a few minutes, but let's have a little more look at some of the news. Mike Thomas, one of the columns online, he writes a lot of stuff on real estate, but he goes out into other areas as well and things. And he's talking about how Musk is going to shake up the woke. It's a neat column, and I'm just loving watching where Elon Musk is going these days. I mean, I don't agree with everything Musk does, and he's far from a perfect individual among those very heavyweight, rich figures out there. But boy, he's shaking the establishment. And that's what I like to see. They're getting stirred up with him. They're getting really wound up. He's a guy which far beyond where I'm at. He's at a level, though, of money that he really does not care what the world thinks. He's going to do what he's going to do. And getting out there and buying that share of Twitter like that, who else can spend a couple $1 billion to take a piece of a social media giant, and then gets himself on the director's board with them. And in doing so, and he's saying outright, he wants to expand free speech, because that's an issue that a lot of people have with Twitter. Twitter arbitrarily blocks a lot of individuals, blocks a lot of discourse. They shadow ban, which they had to admit later. They will throttle what you put out on Twitter. There was a period a year and some ago. I use Twitter a lot. I quite enjoy it. That's my handle, Cory B. Morgan. But at the same time, there's a lot of good and bad on Twitter. And it was a year and some ago during the whole January 6th mess in the States and everything. But holy cow, suddenly my followers list, I don't know, I got 20 some thousand on Twitter nowadays or something, whatever, but it fell by thousands. And no matter how much content you put out and how much you tweeted, they just didn't take off. You didn't see, 3 months before, if I put out what I like to think is some brilliant brain nugget, don't worry, I tweet a lot of stuff that's just stupid too. That's one of the things where you can measure it quickly enough. If Cory said something brilliant, there's going to be a whole pile of retweets and likes, and it'll go around. If Cory said something stupid, it's just going to float by the wayside, and a few people reminding me and explaining that I'm not so bright. But for a period of a couple of months, myself, and we saw it with other blue check conservative minded Twitter accounts, they were getting strangled. You were not seeing traffic. I just couldn't get traction out there. The follower rates just kept dropping, and I wasn't alone. So Twitter had basically taken an editorial stance. And because you didn't see left-leaning Twitter accounts dealing this, you didn't see this happening to anybody else. It was just conservative ones. And it eased off a bit once Biden was fully in and things calmed down. But it shows that Twitter will get in there and mess with things without hesitation. and it throttles open discourse. And when it's something that has millions and millions of followers, when it's something that's that influential, again, I don't believe in having government come in and regulate and tell them what to do. They're still a private company. You don't have to go on there. You don't have to take part. But it is a big and influential company. And seeing somebody like Musk coming on saying, you know what, I'm just going to use my dollars, get in there and shake this up myself and improve this platform and allow more discourse. I can only see this as being a good thing. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Elon Musk does further. As I said, I mean, I don't like how his company with Tesla takes so many subsidies and things like that. I don't agree with him on everything. But I do agree with his just being willing to get out there and tell the establishment to stuff it somewhere deep and dark. And he's putting his money literally, where his mouth is and getting in there and being, to use that buzzword, a disruptor. Okay, let's get on to my next guest. And this is Grant Abraham. He's one of the latest entrants into the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race that we've got going on right now. It's going to be a long campaign, this one. And boy, we've got a lot of candidates putting their names forth. So I'm trying to talk to every one of them and get them on as I can. And Mr. Abraham, I believe, is the sixth one so far. So let's bring Grant into the room here and see what's going on. Hello, Mr. Abraham. How you doing?
Hi, Cory. I'm well. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, I appreciate you coming on to join us today. You're somebody who's a lot of the candidates are people with established political history, whether in their provincial legislatures or as members of parliament. Yourself, you aren't coming from a political background here.
No, I'm not coming from a political background, and my view on that is that we've had two elections that the Conservatives have forfeited, and perhaps the best minds in the Conservative Party need some fresh contributions from people who aren't political. And I certainly think some of the doublespeak and the double-mindedness I see within the party could benefit from people who aren't perhaps colored or have been orientated within the political establishment that we've seen in this last 5 years. So that's exactly why I'm doing it. And I think that Canada is in peril ideologically and economically. And unless we engage clearly and strongly with some stronger messages, we're going to have some real problems in this country in 5 years out. We don't have time to wait another 10 years to unravel or to uproot what's been going on in the nation.
Great. And just to clarify for other people then, what's your background then outside of political, your trade and such, and where are you based?
Well, first of all, I'm a lawyer by profession, and most of my work has been outside of Canada. This last 20 years, I've been involved in international development work, social impact funding to fund helping people, individuals, families, communities in the developing world. And I've been shocked, stunned, actually staggered by what I'm seeing in our own nation in terms of lack of opportunity and a movement towards less money in people's pockets, but recognizing that what the truckers did was actually take us to Ottawa for issues that weren't about money. It was about what the hearts of the people were feeling. And when I saw that, I recognized that the narrative about taxes and dollars and pockets and all that is not what Canadians need. We're seeing the fabric of the nation torn. I'm based essentially in the Fraser Valley in Abbotsford, although I'm a Calgarian historically, and I'm born in Alberta. Raised my early part of my family in Calgary before I headed out and lived in Hong Kong and in the UK, etc. So I'm a Western Canadian.
Great. Yeah. Well, we've hadn't had a lot of Western representation in this race, at least initially. There's a couple of you guys now popping up from the West, which is great to see. And of course, many of our readers and viewers are Western. I see from a couple of commenters, and that's the nice thing with being live. The first two questions we're asking, though, where you stand on climate change legislation, emissions controls, whether or not carbon dioxide is a pollutant, because we're quite concerned with those targets that the federal government has set that sound pretty unrealistic. And we know when they set those targets, it usually comes down on the West.
Absolutely. I'm totally opposed to the carbon tax. I deeply care about the environment. I'm concerned about the climate issue. I think we need to monitor and care for that, but I think we need to be realistic as Canadians and recognize that only 1.6% of the global contribution to carbon is from Canada, and we have slightly less than 40 million Canadians paying for a global contribution, a global tax to offset carbon, and that's what the carbon tax is. And yet the Paris Accord is not having any kind of stringent obligation placed on the biggest polluters in the world, which is India and China. And so the weight, the disproportionate weight that Canadians are being asked to carry is ridiculous. It's making Canada poor. And we absolutely need to get a responsible, environmentally friendly and energy sector reopened in the country and start moving our resources.
Great. So some questions I've been asking every candidate as I get them on, and I want to go through some of them. Our supply management system in Canada, it's been a contentious issue. It certainly was 2 leadership races ago. It hasn't really surfaced as a big issue in this race in particular. But when we keep talking about inflation and pressures on consumers, supply management has often been found to raise the price on a lot of grocery staples for people. Is that an area you'd be willing to start looking into making some changes?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest challenges in Canada is that we're not necessarily thinking about Canadians first and what the nation needs. And the supply management agreement, as I see it, and I've had a fair bit of experience in the agricultural sector, that's one area where our supply management system actually works. And I think what we need to do is rethink that and start to see our food as a geopolitical security item, and start to make sure that our farmers are cared for, that our supply chains are strong and resilient, and recognize that, like many of the other assets that Canada has, our food security is an asset that will position our nation as a trading nation and provide us some of the soft power that we need in the world, because we're maybe not as influential militarily. But if we can be a breadbasket growing food for the world, it provides us a position to, first of all, exert our influence on the global stage, but also, first of all, care for Canadians and Canadian needs first. So I'm not at all convinced that our supply management agreements actually means increased prices for Canadians. In fact, if I look at a recent example that I've had with someone within the egg sector, we've created a scenario where we have a reliance on American eggs coming in, but given that some of their biosecurity issues, we're actually at a shortfall, and our own food supply is now more vulnerable in relation to egg supply. So we need to take care of our infrastructure first in terms of Canada and Canadians' needs.
All right. So getting a little more to the regional front, equalization, of course, is a big area that we've been upset with, particularly in Alberta. We held the recent referendum on that we know it was non-binding, but well over 60% of Albertans say we don't feel we're getting a fair deal out of it. To get rid of equalization altogether would take opening up the Constitution. But one of the things that we can do without opening the Constitution, of course, the formula is just a matter of policy. Would you be looking to change that formula? Because right now it does not serve us very well at all.
Well, we have an ecosystem that went back to 1867 in Upper Canada and Lower Canada. And that framework was developed when there was a lot less people in Western Canada. And I think that as Canada has developed and matured, and the demographics have spread more widely across the country, we need to look at those equalization payments and create a mechanism that there is a system in place that rewards innovation and entrepreneurship, and it doesn't encourage other provinces to not create buoyant economies. And I think that's the mechanism. We are a country that cares about the unity of the nation, and that includes the principle behind equalization, but we don't want it to become a crutch that enables a local or provincial economies to not develop. So I think there needs to be discussions where the disunifying sentiment that is felt in the West is engaged, and there is a feathering or a harmonization that perhaps creates a much more equitable perception in terms of how people feel about the equalization and how the country operates as well in reality in terms of dollars and cents.
Okay. In matters of Quebec itself, I asked a couple of the other candidates. They didn't want to go into it much, but as members of Parliament, when there was that vote recently on preserving Quebec's seats in the House of Commons, even if their population wasn't keeping up in growth with the rest of the country. Some Conservative members voted in favor of that move. Some voted against, and a number of them abstained. I guess I'm getting speculative, but if you were a member of Parliament when that bill was passed, how would you have voted?
Well, let me just say, first of all, I don't like this abstention thing that is happening within the Conservative Party, because people are elected to take positions from their local constituencies and their electorates, and they know very well, the MPs, what their local electorates feel. And I think the conversion therapy bill is an example like that. There were a number of abstentions where people simply didn't have the backbone to stand up and vote. I think in relation to the Quebec question that you're asking me specifically, there is a sense that if there's a firewall being put up around a province where there's a declining population, there seems to be a little bit of unfairness about that. But at the same time, I think that Canada is moving in a good direction in relation to understanding itself better. And by that, I mean, when I observe the discussions with fellow Canadians around Ottawa and the truckers' convoy, I saw a whole new level of relationship, understanding, and trust being established with people from different parts of the country. And I saw Quebecers in a psychological way embracing the value and the significance of unity in the country. So I really want to see our country held together. I think we're better together. I think we're better on the world stage together. And that would be something that I don't like as a person, but I think if we're moving in the right direction in relationship, in terms of understanding ourselves from within this nation, it'd be something that I'd be prepared to overlook if we're building stronger national unity. But there are real issues, and one of the main pieces of my platform is truth, transparency, and real conversations. And I think we need to have these real conversations. And we need to look towards building national unity by having them. And so that's a great question. And I don't like us. We're in too vulnerable a position as a nation to be avoiding those kinds of questions. And I think the Conservative voters out there that are assessing leaders for the leadership of the Conservative Party should be looking really carefully at people who aren't prepared at this stage in the campaign to engage with those difficult questions.
Okay. Getting broader. So we've got the federal budget coming down in a couple of hours from now, actually. A lot of people are anticipating it's probably going to be another big spending budget in a number of areas. Where do you think we should be going? I mean, inflation, of course, is really pressuring a lot of Canadians right now. Some of that can definitely be attributed to the high rate of borrowing on the federal level. Where would you be looking in the future for budgets, though? More spending, less spending, and how would you, I guess, increase or cut in order to do that?
Well, I mean, my perception of the Liberal government is that they're borrowing money almost with an implicit view that they will never have to pay it back. That's a concern, and it makes me wonder what's really going on with the discussion about their proclamation of a reset and Canada moving to a post-national state. But if we're moving back to responsible government in Canada in relation to our fiscal and our monetary policy, we have to look and say that we can't sustain this debt, and we need to look at ways to steward it, to care for it, and to grow our economy without moving to an austerity position that's going to harm Canadians further in the wake of what the Liberals have been doing. So my view is that we need to actually develop and return to what has been our heritage of entrepreneurship and small business and family business, and encouraging innovation and new technology and protecting our intellectual property. That's where we need to be going. We need to be developing the infrastructure that future Canadians are going to need to thrive. And so at this stage, I'm not convinced that moving to any kind of austerity position is going to help Canadians. We need to look at how we grow our economy and how we restabilize the millions and millions of Canadians that are hurting, because who can afford $2 plus liter of gas or a jug of milk at $8 or $9?
Okay. Yeah, it's pressuring everybody. I mean, filling the car and filling the fridge are just a lot of people are having a hard time making the most basic of bill payments right now, and it's got to be addressed. We're going to have some very
Right.
serious problems. Um, so somebody, Daryl Latimer, asking actually about your policy on protecting Canada's North Arctic sovereignty. That's been coming up. Jean Charest was speaking of that recently. Actually, he brought that up when he was on the show earlier. It's a big, complicated area, but people are concerned. Do you have a policy addressing the Arctic?
I absolutely do. I think one of the biggest challenges for Canada is that we've been getting security intelligence on what is going on in the world for the last 20 years, starting with the Sidewinder report back in 2000, that has been, to my mind, essentially ignored in terms of the protection of our nation and its sovereignty, which is a significant issue. That falls right into a discussion about what the UN obligations are that we've brought ourselves under in terms of international treaty. But to answer that question specifically, our sovereignty is a huge issue. If you read any of the reports that are being generated from this government from 2019 on, in terms of foreign interference, it's abundantly clear that we have made ourselves vulnerable and continue to put ourselves in a position where we are vulnerable. And I think we need to be responsibly assertive in terms of defining our position in the North, our resources, and have a mechanism that is congruent across the country, so that all forms of our borders are protected, in not just the landmass borders, but also our idea borders, our intellectual property, and ensuring that we're not having elements within the nation that are actually undermining our nation in terms of foreign interference. So we absolutely need to engage there. And it's nice to see the Liberal government finally took on the position of the Conservative Party to reinforce our Royal Canadian Air Force with F-35s.
Okay, so getting on to just another question from a viewer before we kind of get towards wrapping up. Cheryl Dawn was asking actually about what about mandates and travel bans? Speaking of international, I mean, federally, we still have vaccination mandates. We still have people cannot get on airplanes. There's people who can't, travel internationally, at least not easily. Where are you standing on those items right now?
Well, many of our parents and grandparents went and fought in World War II to ensure that we would have medical privacy, that issues like vaccine would be something that would be between an individual citizen and their doctor. We've never had a policy in the nation where people have been limited in their charter rights and freedoms by the government. In fact, if one reviews the Nuremberg Code, which came directly out of World War II, consent is a significant issue, and yet the government policy to date has been to essentially ignore consent by removing rights of Canadians. So now we have a system in Canada where people who have chosen to remain private about their vaccination status can't travel on flights. They can't travel on our railways that have all been paid for by generations of Canadians in their tax dollars. And one may say that Air Canada now is not a public utility, but it's been bailed out for 40 years by taxpayers to keep the company going, and there's very little difference in it. So I think it's atrocious what's happening in terms of the vaccine mandates. It's the only country in the world that's left that their own citizens can't fly. And I think we need to take a really close review of that and have it removed immediately.
Okay. Well, I think that kind of covers the time I had set up for you. There's always, many, many more things we could cover, but we got through a good bunch of them. Where can people find more information about yourself and your campaign if they want to learn more or potentially get involved?
Sure. My main webpage is called Canada's Promise, www.canadaspromise. And my links for Facebook, for Instagram, and Twitter are on that webpage.
Great. Well, thanks for coming in to join us today. It's, as I said, quite a wide range of candidates, a lot of ideas and issues out there, and it's going all the way till September 10th. So perhaps we'll check in with you again a little later in the campaign and see how things are developing.
Great, Cory. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Habran.
Bye-bye.
So yes, that was Grant Abraham, a candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race. And there are so many of them. I can see some of the frustration from some of the listeners when it came to it, and I've seen that when I've had the other leadership candidates on as well, where these are devoted people towards Western or Alberta independence. And hey, I'm with you guys. I've never made a secret of my feeling that Canada is fundamentally broken, and I don't think there's going to be any way to solve the bigger and larger problems without tearing down the system and at best rebuilding it again. I saw somebody talking about how we could trade with each other as regions and provinces. I mean, on my own view, I love the Swiss system, for example, where you have 26 different states. They call them cantons in one little country, 4 official languages, and you don't have independence movements there because the federal government there is very, very limited, and there's a tremendous amount of regional autonomy for policy. And it's something that authoritarians will never understand. They seem to feel that they can unify people by having a distant central leader, such as Ottawa in our case, and mashing everybody into the same setup and the same policy under each other. And that's what's just leading to this slow decline and constant infighting within Canada and an inability to get good general national policies going. But, and here's where my big but comes in all of this, in the meantime, because we aren't anywhere close, unfortunately, yet to having any province on the brink of leaving, we still have to be led by these federal politicians. So it's still important to listen to them, talk to them, and hey, keep moving towards independence. Absolutely, keep those efforts going. I talked, to Dr. Modry on the Alberta Prosperity Project. I certainly like seeing things, a lot of those independence-minded movements, but it doesn't mean we're immune from the policies of the federal government in the meantime. So, I mean, the best we could do is try to get as many favorable politicians as we can. And I know it doesn't fix things, but it makes them less bad, if you could say that, to put it any other way. But we've got a lot of them running in this race, and something with Mr. Abraham, and I've seen with all of them, yeah, it's really been hard to find a straight shooter so far. A lot of them just like to talk in circles and give political answers and not give definitive answers. At the very end, he did say, get rid of those mandates immediately. That was good to see something definitive. On supply management, he went talking in circles again. None of them will touch supply management. None of them. That's a Soviet-style policy, people, and none of these conservative candidates have the courage to go after it. It's really unfortunate. And again, it indicates how broken the system is, because the reason they won't touch supply management, there's 2 reasons. One is the dairy cartels are very influential. As soon as these guys put their hat in on the race, they get a phone call and a meeting with somebody from the dairy cartel, and often a very generous donation. They're very effective lobbyists, and it shows. The other part is most of Canada's dairy is in Quebec, and nobody on these federal candidates wants to stir up Quebec. None of them want to tick off Quebec because they can't win if they don't have Quebec, even in the leadership race. So I keep getting these mushy answers when it comes to those things, unfortunately. That's that reminder again. We need these federal politicians, but it's clear we're not going to get relief on the federal political front from these guys because they're always going to cater to central Canada. It's not even personal, it's math. It's just they're having to cater to that central area if they want to win. Can't do it without them. And like the old saying from one of Trudeau's advisors when he said, and I'm talking the old Trudeau, senior Trudeau, screw the West, we'll take the rest. And it worked. They won and won and won. They're winning again, and they're in there now. That system is broken, and we've got to work towards getting our way out of it. And that's only going to happen through local initiative, not on the federal ones. Still want to get a conservative government in there. As I said, they'll be less bad. They won't bloat the spending by quite as much as the Liberals, though probably pretty close. They more than likely, depending on which one wins, will back off on the carbon tax. So, I mean, we've seen them flip-flop on that as well. It's still in our interest to have to deal with the system we're stuck in right now, but we got to start looking at our ways to get the heck out of that system because it's not serving us well. I was talking to Professor Barry Cooper yesterday about that. I mean, towards the end of the conversation, that's where the bottom line came, is that we got to get towards independence. And there's some of that frustration. I mean, that's the main thing. A lot of people have been upset with Jason Kenney for his COVID policies or a number of other issues. I've been annoyed by a number of them, but the biggest one for me has been his dragging his feet on the Fair Deal panel. There's a lot of things we can do provincially to make ourselves more independent, to shield ourselves from Ottawa and that central control. And Albertans made it very clear during all those fair deal panel hearings that we want those things. We want a provincial police force. We want a provincial pension plan. We want to look into collecting our own taxes. We want to look into all of these things that Quebec and other provinces are already enjoying. And there's no reason we shouldn't be able to. And he held all those hearings, but he hasn't done anything about it. The only thing he did do was the equalization referendum, which I still appreciate. It's expressing ourselves, but quit dragging your feet on these other things. And for people who want to get independent, there's one of the things I have to keep reminding people of, because I've heard a lot of people saying, we got to hold a referendum tomorrow. We got to do it as soon as possible. No, we can't. We're not ready, which means we have to get ready. If we held a referendum tomorrow on independence, I bet you at best, you would get 20%. I mean, we're talking not even, there's a lot of people, we see some polls that look very favorable towards independence, but they tend to be, would you support the concept? But that's voting in a poll. It's voting looking down the road. When it comes, push comes to shove, actually voting in a referendum when it would lead to actual independence, we don't have our ducks in a row enough yet. We have to fix our own systems. We have to fix our own goals. We have to put those things in place, because that reduces a lot of those questions. People say, well, what do you do for a police force? Well, if we've already got one, we don't have to answer that question anymore. It's done. What do we do for a pension plan? We've already got one. What about taxation collection? We're already collecting it. Incremental. Let's get these things done. Clean up our own backyard. The other thing is, we've got to look better. We've got to be able to assure people that an independent West, whether it's Alberta or Saskatchewan or both or whatever all those combinations are, is going to be better than what we're in right now. And when I see a risk of Notley getting elected again, that means we haven't figured it out yet. How are we going to say we're going to be better than the federal government when we're still capable of putting socialists into our office in Edmonton? The time's going to come. I mean, our system's broken. It's just going to get more and more frustration, and people are going to push for those, but we're not ready to go there yet. Not yet. It doesn't mean stop working towards it. Not at all. But, the hardest thing, and it's something I'm not good with either, is patience. We've got to exercise it. I led the Alberta Independence Party back in 2000. So, 22 years ago. I was just 29 years old, and I led that provincial party into a provincial election, and I was ready to go tomorrow. I wanted out. I didn't have any patience whatsoever. We've got to do this. Well, it's been 22 years, and we're not much closer to being out. I mean, some of that shows that I didn't do a really good job leading that party at that time. But the other thing was, despite my fervor and feeling that we're ready to go and that we're able to go, I was wrong. We weren't ready. We weren't able. I wasn't the person to lead us there. When I talked to Dr. Cooper, or Professor Cooper yesterday, there's a couple other things we're still missing. We haven't had a René Lévesque yet. You want to know a really interesting book to read, honestly. Read René Lévesque's autobiography. Even if you don't like what he did perhaps in Quebec during some of his period there or things like that, it's fascinating. And if you're a person pursuing independence and talking about getting movements together, this guy gives some very good, candid, he never even expected to become premier. He was more shocked than anybody else on his way up. But it's a lesson. I mean, we can get pissed off with Quebec, and I do all the time, and I still do, and I still will. We should also be learning from those guys. They've learned a lot of lessons that we still need to learn. And if we can avoid some of those lessons, one of the ways, too, is reading René Lévesque's book. The right leader can change a lot of things, and we haven't seen that leader putting us towards independence yet. I'm going to speak a little more on some more news items and other issues, but I got to talk about one of our sponsors yet again. And these guys will help us get independent from central banking structures, and that's Bitcoin Well. Again, an interesting story out of Dave talking about us. People are going to be now getting compensated for having their bank accounts seized, and that's a good development. But the problem was their bank accounts were seized in the first place. What is your hedge? What are you going to do? What if you get on the wrong side of government again in the future and they lock down and take your bank account? How do you make your car payment? How do you pay your utility bills? How do you pull out some cash just to get by whilst this authoritarian state is on your case? Well, digital currencies are one of the ways to avoid that. And I know some people are worried about it, but so far, realistically, absolutely, the government cannot get at funds in digital currencies. They'd love to, but they can't. Bitcoin Well is a Western Canadian-based company. They will help show you how you can get into the digital currency market. I mean, it's so new and so foreign. As I say, I'm into my 50s now. I don't fully understand how these things work and all that. it helps to get these guys lay it out for you. And they've set me up. I'm with the company plan here with the Western Standard, that a portion of my salary every month gets put into a Bitcoin wallet for me, and then the Western Standard matches it. And you can set these sorts of things through Bitcoin Well up in your own company as well. It's a nice way for employees to get a little side savings and shield themselves from other control and things like that. It's voluntary, of course. And they walked me through it. Guys confused as me. I'm like, my parents, I used to have to show them how to program a VCR. Now I need smart people at places like Bitcoin Well to help show me how digital currencies work. But they're very good for it, and that's what they do. Check these guys out. Bitcoinwell.com. A great sponsor and a great service. All right. Let's get on to a little more of these issues we got going on. Yeah, there was a story on a poll on rent-to-own plans. Canadians favor a federal rent-to-own program and more investment in co-op housing to help young families. This is a poll. And taxpayers opposed any blanket attempt to lower home prices as a threat to the middle class. Something that sounds like we're going to get a lot of, in speculation coming on today's budget, is that they're going to make homes more affordable. And that really, really scares me. When the government gets in on it, they look to spend money, throw money at things, subsidize things to make them affordable. And of course, in the end, it just costs us and it goes terribly. And one of the life-forming moments, the times I had, was back in the end of the 80s. I traveled through Eastern Europe when it was still the Soviet Union back then. I went through Ukraine and Russia and some areas, and they still remain the ones that they aren't blowing up these days. But the socialized housing, the row housing, these ugly, especially in Moscow, apartment blocks that would just go and go and go as far as the eye can see. Nobody was homeless. No such thing as homeless in the Soviet Union back then. But nobody was living well either. I mean, it was awful looking. I mean, it was almost like prison cells, those things going all the way along. Everybody could get a lot of, if you waited long enough, and if you paid enough, or if you bribed the right person. And of course, that thing was lucky to be running for weeks at a time. This is what happens when government manages things. If we want to make things more affordable for Canadians, there's a couple of things. Yeah, Cheryl's pointing out we've got some foreign buyers that are really messing with our real estate markets, particularly in Vancouver. It's tough, because you don't want to overregulate, but at the same time, if it's distorting the market and putting citizens out of their homes, you've got a bigger problem as well. But if the government just starts pumping money in, when you pump that in, you're just going to raise prices further, you guys. It's not going to help. You got to get out of the way. And a lot of this comes down to local governments as well, though. I mean, we've got municipalities. Calgary's one of them. Edmonton's one of them. We saw it in Vancouver with Mayor Moonbeam out there. Left-wing lunatics running city councils and mayors, and they keep cracking down on development. They're cracking down on outward growth. They got this ideological outlook that if we could just force people into dense living, we'll save the world for all the butterflies and fuzzy bunnies and everything, and we're all going to live in nice, high-density downtown neighborhoods. But what it's doing, unfortunately, in reality, is stunting the growth of supply. And again, socialists never understand supply and demand. Thus, the prices go through the roof and people can't afford housing. The biggest lie that we see are these density zealots, and they're zealots. They push for urban density, and they just feel that it's some sort of panacea to make the world live better. As I said, the urban density in Moscow I saw in 89, 88, that was urban density, and it was wretched. And if you want to look at cost of living, look to the highest density markets in North America. That is New York City. Go to Manhattan, see how much a house costs, an apartment, if you can find one. These dense environments. I mean, get into Boston, get into some of those urban areas where they have high urban density. San Francisco, good luck. Those costs are through the roof. The places where houses are affordable are areas where they allow outward development. Phoenix, Houston, Las Vegas, they got the room. They allow people to build and grow and move out. Dallas, all over the place. So this myth has to end. But having governments get in there and start screwing at the market and throwing money at it, that's not going to help, unfortunately. So I'm not looking forward too much to what the budget's going to offer in that front. Let's see here. So here's blacklist compensations, what they're calling it, for people who unfairly suffered a loss as a result of bank account freezes on the convoy sympathizers. Well, they shouldn't even have to say anybody who unfairly suffered financial loss. Everybody who had their account frozen had it done unfairly. It was never fairly done. It was one of the most odious, disgusting acts of a federal government in Canadian history upon their own citizens. And we're starting in hindsight to unpeel this thing and to get in there and realize just how bad the actions of the government were. As the committees are coming out, we're hearing and seeing that the government, none of their justification was correct. None of these things on cracking down on the convoy and the protests were justified, particularly going into people's accounts, ruining their lives, forcing tow truck drivers to, forced labor. That's slavery, guys. That is slavery. And it's got to stop. I don't know where it's going to stop. They don't show any contrition at this point. Another little news item. Yeah, somebody else pointed out, I guess, Stephen Guilbeault, our environment minister, I'm sure he's grudging about it, but they did approve, even though they delayed forever on it, the Bay du Nord venture. That's that $12 billion oil project off the Newfoundland coast. So that's good. But I guess there was a Suncor expansion they also canceled at the same time. So remember, Eastern oil good, Western oil bad. None of that ever changes. It doesn't matter how much the world might need our domestic oil. We got a federal government who will not allow us to increase the production of it. They want to shut it down. That's not going to change. We've got some serious problems on that front as well. Back to the Ottawa claims, by the way, some people talked about it. I talked about that on Twitter, and I've talked about that on this show. That stupid, ridiculous, bizarre, baloney story of convoy participants taping up the doors of an apartment building, supposedly, and trying to burn it down with people inside it. That story stunk to high heaven right from the very first day. There was this idiot on Twitter who was saying, I'm an apartment resident, and here's all the pictures from the security camera of what happened. I mean, one of those things was, as you read this idiot's account of it, and he's an idiot, he showed, here's a resident coming in. He walked by, and this is how they claimed that this was the convoyers. This is while the convoy was going on. Walked by this person sitting there, setting a fire apparently in the middle of the apartment lobby. Yeah, right in the middle of the floor. Not even very good arsonists, apparently. And the guy said, yes, I'm with the convoy. Self-identified right on the spot. And then this apartment dweller said, oh dear, you're with the convoy and you're looking to burn my building down with me inside it. That's most unfortunate. Got into the apartment, went upstairs, went to bed. What? Yeah, apparently nobody called the cops. Nobody called the fire department. Passerby, I guess, went and put out the little fire in the middle of the floor, and that was the end of it. But media members of parliament, government, all jumped over it. Look at this. These guys are terrorists. These guys are evil. These convoyers are trying to tape up buildings and kill hundreds of people. And that is terrifying. If there was a real attempt, and if there really was. Well, now it's showing they've arrested 2 idiots on this. And whatever it was about, it had absolutely nothing to do with the convoy. Nothing. With both of these suspects. They've both been charged with arson and a bunch of serious charges because it's dangerous and it's crazy stuff. But it had, and all it did was charred the carpet, by the way. Like I said, they weren't very good arsonists. But our media and government used things like this as their excuse, including the mayor of Ottawa, to infringe on the rights of individuals and Canadians. And now it's hindsight. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I guess it wasn't real. Oh, wow. And again, you see, they're doubling down more. I mean, this is where the government's another story where they're eyeing quarantine cops. So they want to give inspectors the police powers. Basically, public health inspectors to give police powers so they can start charging you if you don't stick to a quarantine. Yeah, I mean, last January when I came back from the States, I was down there for a little while, and the testing for COVID didn't come through in time, and we had to be quarantined for a couple of weeks after I got back to Canada. So theoretically, I spent 2 solid weeks in my house. I never stepped out of it after coming back. Had I stepped out of my house over those 2 weeks, I could have been charged. And now they want actual quarantine cops to make sure to follow up and peek in your windows, I guess, and check your garbage or whatever they're going to do to see if you've been breaching their orders to lock you and give you house arrest because they feel you might spread a disease. God. So no, the government isn't learning about respecting our rights any more than they did. But we've got to learn how to get that damn government out of there so that we can start to protect some of our rights. We'll see if it happens. Okay, so tomorrow I got a couple of great guests coming on. One I'm really looking forward to both. Don't want to insult one of them. But he was a former head of the CRTC, and he was a publisher in the media for many years. His name is Peter Menzies, and he's been very critical of these moves, things like C-18 and things empowering the CRTC. This was not what Mr. Menzies envisioned on a regulatory body for media and things such as that. And it's going to be a very good conversation with Peter Menzies about that tomorrow. And then Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Yes, we have him on a lot, but he always has a lot of good things to say, because of course that'll be 24 hours after the budget has come down and we can start to drill down and dissect what the federal government has in mind for us with their federal budget this time around. We know there's going to be a lot of big spending, but we'll be able to get the specifics on it. So tune in tomorrow, guys. It's going to be a good show, and thank you all for tuning in today. I will see you at 11:30 tomorrow.